anybody else, but I am ready for 2020 to be done. It's been a brutal year to say the least, but holidays around the corner. Certainly looking forward to those, spending some time with the family. I do tend to have some vices around the holidays, unfortunately, like most of us do, indulge in several different things, including adult beverages. January rolls around like a lot of folks, setting a lot of goals and looking at New Year's resolutions, getting into the fitness and so forth. So that's why we're calling today's episode Free Beer, as in alcohol free. But hold on now, don't feel like we tricked you, because we're in fact going to give out some prizes for free beer in the episode. So I think we can do that without breaking any rules, since there is no ABV in beers produced by Athletic Brewing Company. So pay attention to our social media and see if you can win some free beer. So no better time to introduce my buddy John Walker, co-founder and head brewer of Athletic Brewing Company. How you doing, John?
Doing well. Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good today. It's Friday that we're recording, and I'll tell you what, I can't wait for this day to be done. But I appreciate your time today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Happy to be here. And thanks for including us.
Yeah, no worries. So a little bit about you. We ran into each other probably 7 or 8 years ago when you're out in New Mexico, and you were at Second Street Brewery there in Santa Fe, and a really accomplished craft brewer there. Second Street, I know, makes some fantastic award-winning beers themselves, and many of Second Street's beers are relatively low ABV styles. Did you find any influence that you had to start brewing alcohol-free beers? Was there something that kind of pulled you in that direction?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say that, that brewing there led me to non-alcoholic beer. This company and this mission kind of like drew me in independently. But, in designing the beers that we're creating today that are under 0.5%, I took a lot of cues that I learned from Rod and the team and the whole New Mexico brewing community, as far as like how to get a ton of flavor into a lower alcohol beer. So definitely some like techniques and some ingredients and some methodologies that I definitely utilized and learned from there that are definitely applicable here.
Yeah, it's certainly a big leap overall. I mean, first of all, making a move from New Mexico to Connecticut, of all things, and then moving from brewing beers with alcohol to non-alcoholic beer for virtually a non-existent brewery in a category not a lot of people in North America, especially in the craft market, are very aware of.
Yeah, it was definitely a big change. And I didn't, at first I was kind of taken aback when I spoke with Bill the first time. I did get it too. It made sense. And the craft beer community is so explorative and creative. It was actually shortly after I talked to Bill for the first time, it was kind of surprising that nobody had really like gone into the non-alcoholic segment. So it made sense that it needed to be explored. And then in addition to that creative element and exploration culturally, and as far as like beer reaching a wider audience, it made great sense to me too.
I think it's perfect timing that we're having this conversation. And over the last, 3 or 4 weeks, really, unfortunately, spending a lot of time at home, like a lot of people, but a lot of chatter about up and coming styles, what's new, where the next big segment is in craft beer. And what always shows up on the top is the NA beers. You guys have a location there in Connecticut, obviously, and then just recently opened out in San Diego. Is that right?
Yeah, so we started brewing in Stratford, Connecticut, where we built our first brewery, and we do about somewhere around 11,000 barrels out of this facility. At the time we built it in 2017, 2018, we had thought that it might supply us for 3, 4, 5 years. Turns out it lasted about a year and a half at best, and so we quickly expanded our footprint here, and then again just kind of ran into capacity issues. So as we were kind of soul searching and looking for the next stage of the company, we landed on the former Ballast Point facility that is in San Diego. And Bill and I happened to be at GABF in Denver. And instead of coming back to Connecticut, we flew directly to San Diego for the day to look at the facility, met over coffee after looking at it, and never looked back. And so now we have this amazing facility out in San Diego as well, and an amazing team out there, and taking it from both sides of the country now. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think your production barrelage will be end of this year? Just curious.
We're hoping to be we'll be probably just under 40,000 barrels this year.
Gosh, 2017. Wow. And it's all NA beers?
Correct.
Gosh, that is wild. Well, congratulations to you. That is awesome. Absolutely, very, very, very cool. And hopefully, we'll continue to see that grow. Kind of taking a leap back on you and kind of how you stepped in and how you kind of started figuring out some of these NA beers. You obviously you couldn't pilot brew recipes at the brewery prior to you guys opening up because it wasn't built yet, but you pretty much homebrewed your own NA beer recipes for a good while until you guys were up and rolling, right?
Yeah, we signed a lease on our warehouse in September, and then, knowing we had just come from a brewery build out in Santa Fe, and I knew pretty well that it was going to be a while before we saw any equipment that was usable on the ground. So that day we bought a bunch of home brewing equipment and started brewing in the warehouse. And then once construction started, I kind of migrated that mobile operation, if you will, to my garage. And so I would brew up there during construction. Bill would kind of oversee the whole project and build the business, and he would come up and help me bottle, and then he'd go out and sample people on this wild non-alcoholic beer that never existed.
And so how many brews over kind of what period of time did it take to get that process and kind of that first NA beer dialed in to your liking?
We were probably 30, 40 batches in before I started seeing light personally at the end of the tunnel. And so then I'd say probably another 30 to 40 batches after that, where we started really like kind of nailing down the process and, feeling like things were fine tuned and maybe at a place where we could step it up to our pilot and then production facility.
Particular style of beer that you went through that R&D process with, or was it kind of a myriad of stuff?
No, we kept it really simple, and that's kind of reflected in our two flagships. We have the Upside Down Golden and then the Run Wild IPA. And so kind of in brewing, IPAs are imperative and delicious, and everybody loves hops. Not everybody, but most people. So definitely went with an IPA. And then we also wanted to make like a lighter, leaner, crisper beer that wound up also being hoppy because we love hops again, just a little more approachable and lighter. And so we started off with the Golden and the IPA and followed those through to the end and kind of built the process around those two recipes and then developed that into all the other styles and brands that we have now.
How many styles or how many brands or kind of segment products do you have thus far?
Yeah, so we have 3 flagships right now, 2 IPAs, 1 Golden. We've got 2 seasonals, a stout and a kind of amber lager, if you will, a Vienna of sorts. And then we also have a whole bunch of limiteds and pilot batches coming out of both facilities all the time that we'll release periodically in the market or on e-commerce. And gosh, I mean, we between the teams, just like crushing it on the creative end right now, we probably have 30 successful recipes.
God, that is great. It's really not just a brand that I've seen from you guys. It's more like a culture. Now, is that something that you guys kind of set out to build originally?
Yeah, I do think that it was like part of the DNA. And it's perfect and it makes total sense. A lot of what, non-alcoholic beer had been prior to us and, our comrades in this mission, it was the penalty box beer. And so really to make it successful and to make people approach it with a positive attitude and a positive light, there needed to be a culture shift, and we need to develop a product and a brand and a drink segment that could be appreciated and was inclusive and positive. And so I got to give credit to Bill when he was out there at all these races and was, just like fearlessly saying like, this is a good drink and this is positive and this feels good. So, that was definitely part of people in our segment now are using the same language, and that's awesome. It's perfect. It's exactly what needed to happen. And yeah, we're pumped for it.
Yeah, I'm proud, super proud of you guys, and obviously want to continue to see you guys grow. So let's go into the nuts and bolts, if you will, talking about kind of the process and raw materials, ingredients. So obviously in your NA beers, there's certainly a focus on preservation of flavor. So RO is driving off the alcohol with heat. What does vacuum distillation of alcohol do to the beer flavor? What are some of the hurdles to overcome in membrane filtration?
So vacuum is usually, or it was high, but now it's low temperature. So distillation, it's just like a temperature removal of the alcohol and essences, and then you can re-inject a lot of those essences back. RO kind of filters out the alcohol and the water, and then you're left with your sugary mass, and you can like redilute down that concentrate. There are challenges on both sides. Heat treatment is always a concern when you're dealing with volatile, hop components and malt components and aromas and stuff like that. Are things the same after they've been treated? I don't think so. And, similar goes for RO, less heat and more just kind of adaptation and more of a science in like minerality and how to introduce water back to make sure that you're still coming out with a beer component. So, there are challenges to both those methods that are super interesting, but I think a lot of those things and challenges can be overcome just simply by recipe design.
Yeah, absolutely. And then talking about malts, obviously my company is in the malt business and other products as well, but that's kind of the core of it. Do malts present differently in alcohol-free beers versus standard beers? And is there do you gravitate towards certain malts for your recipes and why?
Yeah, I think a lot of them can change over time, especially depending on like the treatment that you're using. But ultimately, it's all the same malts. We don't gravitate towards anything. We design the malt bill just as you would with a full strength alcoholic beer, and we use the same crystals, the same kiln malts. Really, nothing different. And yeah, basically, it's you just have to find the right and highest quality malt, and through great partners like you guys, we can do that.
And I know Great Western Malting specifically does some unique stuff for you guys on the West Coast. And it seems like, when there is an option, you guys lean towards organic when that's available. And it's really cool, number one. Is there a specific reason? Obviously, you guys can't claim you're 100% organic or organic that I know of, but you guys seem to lean towards organic when you have the option.
Yeah, we do. And, that's important to us. Basically, the reason for that is a lot of those times that people are taking the extra care to make it organic by design and by nature, like people are caring more about that product. And we tend to think that it's reflected in the quality and taste of the product, at the end user. And it also supports kind of a better mission and ethos. And, we'd love to become more sustainable and get away from GMOs and pesticides that are really terrible and harmful for our environment and the people consuming our products and the world. So, there's a direct flavor impact, but a greater mission.
No, I love that view. And those folks like yourself that lean towards that for those reasons, really, really commendable.
Thank you.
Another factor in NA beer innovation is we talked about it, the contributions that new hop varietals lend in flavor and aroma versus when NA beers were produced previously, like my grandpa's NA beer. Considering the extra process involved in removing alcohol from your beers, how important is dry hopping to create the flavor profiles? Do hop flavors come through differently in standard beer versus alcohol-free beer in your experiences, and how?
Yeah, so a couple things. Dry hopping is critical, as is standard beer of any sort. It's not necessarily, it's kind of like style specific, but, it really showcases the hops the best, I think, in that particular field. But to clarify, we don't ever remove any alcohol from our products. And so the way we use hops is pretty creative, but generally pretty traditional. That being said, yeah, dry hopping is still key and super important, and we love it. And, we do a lot of exploration with all of the new hops. And like, we've got this single hop series that, just like in alcoholic beers, we have our single hop series that does a fantastic job at showcasing those hops and how like dynamic hops are in general. So it's super exciting and something to keep an eye out for. We have a single hop of Sabro right now, which is just like out of control.
That's cool. Interested in trying that one. There aren't any laws against selling NA beers online, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but compared to a brewery producing beers with alcohol, can you compare and contrast the difference in challenges that you face and that you don't face?
In terms of selling?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, so you're right, mostly. There are a number of states where non-alcoholic beer is considered beer. So word to the wise, if you're shipping even non-alcoholic beer, make sure that those states are in tune with what you're doing, because not all of them are. They have a lot of, antiquated laws and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, we're able to reach our consumers directly. We're able to have what we consider to be our national tap room, and that is our e-commerce platform where we can go directly to our customers from our warehouse. It's literally like coming off the packing line and going into a box, and it's hitting people's doorsteps in 1, 2, 3 days. So we get direct feedback just like you would at a pub or a tap room. And so that is just like the best thing ever. And it helps us learn more about our product and our process. It also really helps us get to know our customers and our teams better. And it's fun and it's creative. And because our process is unique, we can get all this creative stuff out to, many different people all the time. Past that, we kind of follow a lot of traditional channels as far as distribution because our distribution partners are experts at what they do. And, they have these long-standing relationships in the communities, and they're just really perfect at distribution and relationships. And so, it'd be kind of crazy not to go with them because they've been at it so long and they have such a great track record. So in almost all territories that we're in, or in every single territory that we're in, we're with a traditional distributor. And then we also have teammates who are, on the ground supporting those distribution companies.
Did you guys find it a challenge kind of interviewing and searching for distributors, considering this is somewhat of a new market on the craft side?
It was a little more challenging 2 years ago. It's far less challenging now because, the world has opened up a lot to non-alcoholic and health and wellness in general. And people are seeing it as a, really durable and huge trend that is really just opening up. So the conversations and the education hurdles are much easier now than they were.
Another question. Since your beer is alcohol-free, what is the tax situation like, if you don't mind me asking? Do you still have to go through that kind of that bureaucracy brewers face that are brewing and producing standard beers?
I mean, we still have to file, but as far as paying the excise tax, no.
Yeah, they'll come get you either way, right? There's been a lot of challenges for craft brewing this year, obviously. One of the things that we see is just the supply chain of a lot of different products, and specifically right now, cans. Have you had that challenge as well? Have you had some difficulties maintaining consistent supply with not only cans, but other products from vendors as well?
Yes and no. We've been super lucky. We've been in a great place on the can front. Yeah, just like everybody else. I mean, our COO, Jamie, probably spends 75% of his days trying to track down cans. And, at this point, you're buying from far off distant countries and hoping that they work.
Right.
Everybody's facing the same challenge. And especially as you're trying to grow capacity and grow volume, definitely not easy. And, the customers see it to some effect too. And, everybody asks that everybody's a little bit flexible because, we'd love to be all in preprint cans, but you can't always have them right now. And sometimes we have to label as a company. We'd rather have packaging that is not always consistent right now, but have beer in the market. So, having product out there is more important right now than having absolutely consistent packaging. And that's just kind of a pill we had to swallow.
What about the global perspective, or is the popularity of NA beers the same kind of trend outside of North America? I mean, are we seeing similar segments pop up in Germany and other European countries?
Yeah, we're not seeing them because they happened a long time ago. So when we first started, a lot of what this model was built out on was the success of non-alcoholic beer and the non-alcoholic beer culture in Europe and Australia and honestly the rest of the world. For whatever reason, we just had this long-standing stigma that was terrible, and it don't know why. We just couldn't get past it. But Spain is somewhere around, it's 15% of their beer market. Germany is around 11%. These are huge numbers. When we started, NA beer was at 0.2% of the craft market.
Wow. Where do you think we are now in North America as far as impact on overall production, as far as the NA is concerned?
Bill's really the numbers wizard, but I think we're probably up 1 and change, 1.5 maybe.
Gosh,
but it's growing a lot. It's 30%, so it's definitely growing.
Yeah,
you can see that reflected in all the there are a lot of bigger players coming out with new non-alcoholic beers now.
Sure. I certainly don't want to give away any secrets, and obviously, you have kind of your segment you guys want to hold on to. But for those smaller craft brewers that are, on premise only and really take pride in serving beer out of the tap room, is it something that you would suggest they look into as far as like trying to brew an NA beer and have something continuously on tap as an option for patrons after COVID goes away, obviously?
Yeah. I mean, we've been discussing that a lot, and we definitely think that non-alcoholic beer has a place on draft in a big way coming out, because a lot of these places that have been built in the past couple of years, breweries and tap rooms alike and beer bars, they've got like 30, 50, 80 taps. It'd be silly not to have like 2 non-alcoholic options. So there's definitely a place for them. And I don't want to discourage anybody, because I think it's fun and it's awesome and it's explorative and, everything about craft. The one thing in hindsight is like food safety and integrity of the product, especially, if you're going to hit the non-alcoholic market and you are answering to the FDA then, and that's a big change. And you have to have a real legitimate food safety plan and make sure that product never creeps up over 0.5%, because that's dangerous and you're serving to sensitive populations potentially. So I'm all for the exploration and being creative, but definitely a word of caution as far as like the sensitivity of creating a non-alcoholic beer that, as we well know, one yeast cell can do a whole lot. So
I'm glad you mentioned that. It's something I certainly didn't think about as far as FDA and some of those regulations there. Very good. Well, you guys are growing fast, as we discussed. And what's interesting is you guys are winning awards a lot of times, really, really coming out and winning awards up again in taste test, obviously, against beers produced with alcohol. Like, just to name a few here, Grand Champion of Non-Alcoholic Beers by the Growler magazine. The International Beer Challenge named you guys Brewer of the Year. And then obviously some World Beer Awards. I'm sure there's many, many more, John. What's the biggest honor of all for you in Athletic Brewing so far?
The honor part I could take in any number of ways. That could be like an internal, more grand topic, but like from an award standpoint, the Supreme Champion of the International Beer Competition and the North American Brewer of the Year Award coming from that was absolutely incredible, because we won the non-alcoholic beer category. And then what was really, really awesome to see was that we went up in the Best in Show competition with all of the winners of all of the alcoholic segments and won overall against all of them. And that is incredible for the team, one, and beer in general, and culture. And there's a definite culture shift, and that's awesome to see. People are, starting to view this as an awesome drink, and it's respected, and it can, people recognize that it can stand on its own 2 feet next to beer, and it's not like we're trying to cut beer out, but we're just trying to add another one to the already awesome list.
I can second that. We've got a majority of our staff on our sales side at Country Malt Group are brewers by trade, and the feedback I've gotten from them, they dabble in some of your products, is really unbelievable. When they half the time they enjoy drinking it more so than some of their favorite standard beer. So you guys are doing a fantastic job.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Who have been your mentors, inspirations in the brewing industry as you kind of progress through your career?
So a far throwback to my dad, who introduced me to Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. That's, first and foremost. That's where my definition of beer came from. And, I'm ever grateful for that, because to this day, Ken Gross and the entire Sierra Nevada team, their whole business, as a community too, is just an inspiration. And then, past that, Rod Tweet at Second Street Brewery, the entire team there, Jordy, that's where I learned everything from the beginning. And then the entire craft brew community in New Mexico was so generous and kind and sharing, be it like Ted or Josh Trujillo from Marble, or Jeff from La Cumbre, or Daniel. Those crews were huge, and just like helping me learn what I know today. So huge shout out to all of them.
Yep. And again, I second that. I know the guys in there are solid individuals, and I miss seeing them. That's for sure.
Yep.
John, thanks so much for joining us here today on the Brew Deck. I really dig what you guys are doing. And it's not only cool, but it's an important service to all the people who enjoy the full flavor of craft beers. They're not specifically looking for the alcohol. So for those of y'all listening, if you haven't had it yet, please give it a try. As John mentioned, you can order their product online. I've done it. It's seamless. It's good stuff. And John, thanks again. And I appreciate your good work, and keep at it because we enjoy it.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. And, really appreciate you having us on to share.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for the business again. So next up, we have the second segment of the Brew Deck podcast called The Whirlpool. Since it's the end of the calendar year, as discussed, we're going to do a top 10 countdown of brewing innovations that have been major game changers for craft brewers. So grab something carbonated and join us for The Whirlpool. Here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, thanks for joining us on another episode of The Whirlpool. Today, exciting day. Being that it's close to the end of the year here, there's no more fitting person to have on to talk about a top 10 list he recently generated and sent my way. It's Grant Lawrence, our South Central Sales Territory Manager for Country Malt Group. Grant, how's it going, buddy?
Doing well, Toby. Doing well. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, we got two Texas guys here, and Grant is down in Houston, and I'm up in Dallas. And so it gives us the excuse talking today that we can use y'all as much as we want.
That's right.
And fixing, like I'm fixing to do this. It's not like you're fixing your car. You're fixing you're about to do something. So listeners, be ready for that. We're going to do it as much as we can. All right. Let's get started on the list of the top 10 brewery innovations of the past decade, starting with number 10, rapid QC testing via PCR method.
Yeah, Toby. So, I guess I really got into homebrewing a little over a decade ago, but it's something that I've seen in the pro world just go from being kind of obscure, something that only the really, really big boys would have, to seeing craft have it more. The real advantage to it is you don't, when you do a standard auger plating, you have to wait 48 hours. And then if you get a false positive, you have to retest it with the PCR method, which, is kind of, if anything, people know more about PCR than ever right now because that's how they test for COVID, right? But within a few hours. So you can test a bright tank or a fermenter or anything questionable and know if it has wild yeast or lactobacillus or all kinds of different microorganisms, and know quickly. There's a couple of them out there. Visible Sentinel's great, kind of more of an entry level one. And then the Paul Gene Disc is a little newer. It runs more assays at one time. So it's really cool seeing breweries have more and more of those, and just overall helping craft brewers have better quality with their stuff, their beers.
Nice. All right, moving on to number 9, aseptic fruit purees.
Yeah, so really, I put this one on here just because the huge rise that we've seen with aseptic purees. 10 years ago, it was kind of like, fruited beers were a 90s thing, but the fruited beers of today are not like those older beers. The aseptic process is different than canning, so it really preserves flavors and colors a lot better. Just makes a beautiful fruit beer that has a bright color, less oxidation that way. And then that just helps the flavor and color be better. And they're just so much easier to use than using fresh fruit, right? So a lot of brewers, it's cool and all to go pick local fruit and use that in your beers when you can. But you're kind of a slave to the season of that fruit and the Oregon fruit aseptic purees. And there's some other ones out there now too that they just make it a lot easier, and just really seen those blow up over the past few years.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fitting because recently recorded another podcast episode with Chris Hodge from Oregon Fruit Products. So listen for that episode. It was very interesting learning about kind of the explosion of the fruit purees, especially in the brewing world. So, something came up during our conversation with with Chris. We were talking about what's the strangest fruit or most interesting fruit you've had in a beer. Anything that you can recall having, Grant, in your days of enjoying some fruit beer?
Yeah, it's covering the Southwest for country malt fruit. I don't think it's as popular in other places, but prickly pear cactus. There's not an aseptic puree of it yet. I've heard it's in the works, but that's definitely an interesting fruit beer. When it comes to the actual purees themselves, one that kind of strikes me as being interesting is Italian plum. Is one that is just kind of nice, works good in Belgian beers.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, I've had a couple of prickly pear beers. There's a couple of folks down here in Texas that make it, and you're right. It's a great fruit, very interesting, and I'd hate to be the person that like handles that stuff, picking it off the cactus. It's like you get like permanently scarred by some of those little stickers in there.
I think they wear like special gloves or mittens or something like that. But yeah, process.
Yep. Yeah. All right. Moving on to number 8. Vegetative matter reduced hop products.
It's kind of a catch-all term. YCH has probably the first one that I know of in my opinion, the best. YCH is cryo hop. It does a couple things for you. So the way they make them, the breakdown of it, the gist of it is they take the whole cone hops, put them in a chamber, blast them with liquid nitrogen, and then through a physical process, they can sieve out the lupulin glands, and the glands are whole. They're like a little ball bearing. So those glands they don't burst, so they don't oxidize. You maintain flavor and aroma better through these kind of products that are made this way. And then you separate all the bract out. So for Whirlpool editions or dry hop, things like that, the bract absorbs a lot of beer. Not only do these kind of have, I would say they're extremely juicy. If you're not familiar with them, they taste like juice. If that's what you want in your beer, but they're completely natural hop products, and they waste less beer, and they make some really awesome beers. I think there's more than ever. I'd say brewers have latched onto that over the past 5 years, and you're seeing even classic IPAs that people made, and they're starting to make more and more varietals into the vegetative matter reduced hop products.
Yeah, you're right. I think we're going to continue to see innovation as far as that's concerned. And looking back, I remember when I had a sip of my first beer with specifically cryo, and it was down at Pint House Pizza down in Austin. And I think they were probably originally playing around with that. And it was unbelievably unique hop experience that I had never tasted before. So good stuff. Good stuff. Number 7 on Grant Lawrence's list of top 10 brewery innovations of the past decade: individual crowler machines.
Yeah. So, I don't think that this one on the list is too much of a surprise to anyone. Maybe the newer brewers out there that are going to open a brewery, but man, these things have really taken over. I'd say they're pretty ubiquitous for smaller breweries and smaller craft breweries. And it allows you to can one beer at a time to go. It kind of replaced growlers, which were just more annoying to use and to fill, and just inevitably would have more pickup of dissolved oxygen. So it made better growler beer. And really, the other thing I would say that it did is it helped spur the trading of beers. It's so much easier to ship. It's more compact. And since it stays better, longer being poured off a keg, I would say the trades of, rare beers and specialty beers from small craft breweries has really expanded due to the individual crowler machines. They're affordable. They're affordable as well.
Yep. And I think we've seen more and more breweries heading to this particular type of machine, specifically because of COVID and all that's going on with to go and take out and that. So certainly a high growth in that realm, if you will.
For sure. Like a small canning line, right? The smaller ones are still $35,000, where you can get into a individual crowler machine for, I think, under $3,000. So, just a massive savings for, really your nano brewers, your real small craft breweries.
Yep. Absolutely. All right. Moving on to number 6, Grant Lawrence's top 10 brewery innovations of the past decade: digital density meters, Anton Par, DMA 35, and now Easy Dens as a couple of examples.
Yeah, so it wasn't even that long ago that every brewery, especially craft brewery, I mean, even now, they still haven't necessarily exploded. I'd say it's still kind of on the cusp. But when you're going around and your brewery grows and you have 10 fermenters plus, the time it takes to use a standard hydrometer and to get your samples at the right temperature that your hydrometer is calibrated at and to read it. It takes a lot of time, and we all try to read it as best we can, right? But it's an analog device. So two brewers reading it might get a slightly different answer. You just do not have the resolution that you do when you go digital. So Anton Par is a pretty big company. Most people have heard of them. They do all kinds of measurement stuff, but they came out with the DMA 35. And I want to say it was something like, it wasn't cheap. It was something like $7,000, even just less than 10 years ago. So only large breweries had it. And the way it works is it picks up a sample of beer. It compensates for temperature, of course, but it can even compensate to some degree for carbonation. You still want to like decarbonate your samples, like either a shaker table or something to get the CO2 out to get the best reading. But you can know down to the third decimal place, or maybe even beyond that, really, now that I think about it. You just have such resolution and know whether or not your fermenting beer is changing density, is it still fermenting? And you can know better when to close a tank, and just you have better records. And if I look at it and it tells me a number, then it's digital, right? So it's the exact same number when my buddy reads it. You just get so much more in tune with your beers, you know? And then on top of that, the reason I put it on here is it's just really progressed so far, right? So the Easy Dens now is a similar product. It's a little less sophisticated, but I believe it has the exact same measuring device in it. I think those are only like $400. So when it comes down to it, it's like the price on those has just really come down. I mean, even like fancy homebrewers are getting like Easy Dens now just to be super accurate on their gravity readings. So pretty cool.
Yep, absolutely. All right, moving on to number 5, alpha acetylacetate decarboxylase. I just butchered that, man. I'm gonna call it AAD, and I'll let you describe what this is.
I'm gonna do my best here though. Alpha acetylactate decarboxylase. So it's just a super fancy chemistry word for a diacetyl blocking enzyme. I don't have too much experience with this, but this has been around since like the 70s, I believe. But really, enzymes in general, not just in craft beer, have just really blown up over this past decade. And now they're just more affordable than ever. And they're very potent. They have good shelf life. What it allows you to do with your craft beers is, you know, if you want to, if you're not extremely hung up on Reinheitsgebot, right, you can use this enzyme and block diacetyl from forming in the fermentation. So you can knock out a beautiful Munich Helles or a Pils or something like that and save yourself a lot of time because you don't have to do long diacetyl rests. So it saves labor, saves time. And, you know, diacetyl in general for certain breweries can be something that's annoying. I mean, it's going to pop up here and there and it can cause problems if you miss it. Your beer goes out on the market and has a buttery diacetyl flavor. It's just not what you want. Kind of hurts your brand, right? So this just makes lagers more accessible and just faster to make. And they're awesome.
I like butter on popcorn, but not in my beer, for sure. All right, moving on to number 4, more access to brewery automation.
Yeah, that's another one. So automation, you know, it used to be something that only the really major players had. Even like your large regional breweries, like automation was pretty cutting edge for them. And now I'm seeing guys they only have 20 barrel brew houses and they've like automated this or that. There's a bunch of companies out there that do it. I think that it can be pretty neat. Now that it's more affordable, it makes it easier to be kind of a brewer owner and run a pretty sizable brewery with limited staff. It's pretty cool. And, you know, for larger breweries, it kind of frees up some of those mundane tasks that the brewers have to do and maybe give them more time for what they really got into it for, right? So R&D, one-off beers, things like that. They can be doing that while certain processes are running. It's just really neat. And I think part of it is the education around brewery automation has just programming in general is a more common career path, or it's just taught in schools more commonly than ever. And I think that's kind of spilling over into having better access to brewery automation.
Yeah, it's very rare I walk into a brewery these days and don't see some form of automation. So you're absolutely right. All right, cool. Moving on to number 3 of the top 10 brewery innovations of the past decade. More access to ingredients worldwide, actually access to ingredients from a lot of different places around the globe.
That's right. So, again, only a decade ago, it was really hard if you wanted some kind of malt from Germany or some kind of interesting malt or any kind of ingredient from some corner of the world. It was pretty hard to get. You had to jump through a lot of hoops, just lots of logistics issues. And I would say now more than ever, maltsters and raw ingredient manufacturers are willing to do some kind of international business with U.S. craft brewers. And it's like, you feel like a kid in a candy store as a brewer because you just have so many more options, right? There's kind of an infinite amount of combinations of malt, hops, and yeast and stuff for beer to begin with. And now it's like, it just feels like an ocean of neat things to make, new brews to make.
There's brewery ingredients or raw materials moving, outside of North America across the pond and vice versa. So it's very interesting, the ingredients that we have to work with here in the States. Let's move on to number 2, hop guns.
Yes, hop guns. So they just have, like many other things, they've come down in price, and this kind of feeds back into the automation, right? They've come down in price. It's not so much a niche product anymore. There's more vendors out there making hop guns, and with the cryo hops, with these hazy IPAs and things like that, you can get more bang for your buck with your hops by shooting them in usually to the racking arm into your fermenter. So it's a better use of hops. It wastes less beer. And, and it's safer too, because as your brewery grows and you get larger tanks, it kind of bites to put on a safety harness and get on a scissor lift and stand up on top of a 3-story tall tank to dump hops in. And, at a certain point, you just need a hop gun.
And the last, number 1, haze.
Yeah, right. I had to put it on there. It's still a polarizing topic for some brewers, but the trend is definitely there among consumers to like haze. And it's just funny how it's gone. I'm just watching brewing over this past decade. It wasn't even that long ago that hazy beers were just viewed by the craft beer drinker as like an inferior product. If your beer's hazy, you don't know what you're doing. And that wasn't even that long ago. And it's just interesting to see that it has completely done a 180. And now it's hazy beers are seen as like a mark of quality, right? It's kind of blows my mind. But, from a consumer standpoint, they're looking at it as like, well, it's hazy because there's so much hops. There's so much hops in suspension. And there's some truth to that in some ways. But yeah, it's just really come to dominate the IPA and pale ale scene with hazies. And so much so that there's even been some backlash, right? You have guys that specifically, say like, oh, this is an old school IPA or this is a clear one. I see brewers say that. But it's neat how raw ingredients have kind of responded, right? So, for example, Canada Malting makes an awesome malted oats. They were malted specifically for a stable haze, and they do a great job of it. And there's a lot of craft brewers that really utilize those. And then, you have other vendors now coming out with neat stuff like Fermentis has their Spring Blanche. It is a yeast extract. So it's natural. It's Reinheitsgebot. It fits that, but it gives you a nice stable haze. And, they're not the only ones. I know I think there's some enzymes out there that can do it as well. So it's just really, I had to put it on here because it wasn't that long ago that nobody wanted a hazy beer. And now it seems like only, there's a lot of consumers younger craft consumers that's all they know. And they specifically seek out hazy IPAs. Just kind of mind blowing.
No, yeah, I remember back in the days, if I would open a beer and pour it into a pint glass and it was stuff floating around in there, I would send it back to the bartender and say, no thanks, or dump it out. These days, the more haze and the more stuff floating around, I guess the better.
Yeah. I was in a brewery once just enjoying myself, and some of these younger folks came in and they opened the door and they were like, hey, do you got any hazies on tap? And the bartender there was like, no. And they just turned around and left. It just really stuck out in my mind. It's funny.
Yeah. Well, Grant, this has been an awesome list. I appreciate you putting the time together to piece all this together. So it's been a real pleasure having you on today. Fantastic list here. And I miss seeing you, buddy. And hopefully when this COVID stuff turns the corner, I'll make a trip out to Houston and come hang out with y'all. And at this point, we're fixing to y'all fixing to get rid of this thing. So, all right, Grant, I appreciate your help. And that was Grant Lawrence's top 10 brewery innovations of the past decade. Well, that's a wrap on season 1 of the Brew Deck podcast. It's been a lot of fun, and we appreciate y'all taking the time to give us a listen and look forward to releasing season 2 after the new year. Be safe, stay healthy, and Merry Christmas. Happy holidays and Happy New Year. Again, I'm your host, Toby Tucker. Have a good one. Cheers.